Now I'm going to introduce our second domain in this course. We've called it brain developmentalism. And here we're going to look at some psychologists who were interested in the role of biology in human development, and particularly in the brain, and stages of cognitive readiness. And this led to some concepts like the language instinct in humans, and also to the growth of neuroscientific studies of the working brain. The first person we're going to have a look at is Jean Piaget, who was a man from Switzerland, and he actually assisted in the marking up of Binet's intelligence tests. But in the process of doing that, he discovered that children's minds were different from adult minds. So he came up with a biological view of intellectual development. Secondly, we're going to look at Noam Chomsky and Steven Pinker, both Americans. Both saw language as a biological human affordance, and they introduced us to the field of cognitive sciences, which rivaled behavioralism. And lastly, we're going to kind of go back to have a look at René Descartes, a Frenchman, and John Locke, an Englishman, both who were interested in the study of the relationship between the mind and body for learning development.
Piaget is one of the most influential child psychologists who, by virtue of that, has been tremendously influential in education generally. And he had a number of key ideas that he developed. One was that there were, regardless of social and cultural context, a number of stages of development which are stages of biological development, brain development, if you like. And that although learners actively build their own knowledge, they only build it within the capacity of one's brain at that particular stage of development. So he is one of the people who first coins this term constructivism, but constructivism is not really inventing the world in this free-form, open kind of way. It's actually just simply building the world for oneself, building a mental image of the world, building an understanding of the world, building concepts within the frame of biological capacity at that particular stage of development of the brain. So it's a complicated kind of relationship between the development of the brain and the social development of the brain via processes that he called assimilation and accommodation. They were the processes whereby the meanings of the world were brought into the brain at a stage, at a point which was appropriate to that level of its biological development. That's a very rough outline of his ideas. Again, on our New Learning Online website, you'll find an extract which where he talks to this, and also some videos as well where he lives to be an very old man, so we get to both hear about him or know about him early in his career when he's forming these ideas, but he keeps talking about them to the age of cinema, where we can actually hear him speak still. In this relationship then of the developing brain and the processes of assimilation and accommodation, one of Piaget's key ideas is the idea of readiness. You can't learn something until you're at a stage of development where there's appropriate readiness for that learning. Noam Chomsky is not a psychologist. He's a theorist of language. But what's really interesting is that his work is really about the nature of the mind. That's the truth of it. And what his argument is, that behind a sentence is a set of reasoning structures which are learnt. So Chomsky comes up with the idea that these are so phenomenally complex and learnt so quickly that they can't simply have been acquired from the environment. Yes, you learn English very quickly, you learn German very quickly, you learn Chinese very quickly, but there's just so much to those languages which is so complicated that the surface form of the language must have underneath it a universal structure of the mind which must be already there in a language organ because it is so elaborate and it's so complex. That's the kind of argument. So it's a complicated argument that he runs about not the forms of language, which are quite varied, but the common universal structures of language which underlie those, which must actually be structures of the mind. So in fact, by running an argument about language, he's actually running an argument about the mind itself. Now, one of the things that Chomsky does, which is perhaps controversial, is he says there's a universal grammar, that behind all the languages of the world is a single universal grammar, which is the structure of experience, if you like, where things fit into structures of action, where logical connections are made, and this is common to all human beings. Now, in a way, this is controversial and a problem because, we know there are enormous cultural differences which reflect actually very different ways of thinking. So this question of the nature of what's common to all humans and what's the extent of our differences, he kind of wants to elide that because he's only interested in what's common in this thing which is the language organ, right? And the language organ is something which is unfindable. It's not in any particular area of the brain. Yes, that more language happens in some parts of the brain than others, but in fact, the whole brain is dealing with language all the time. And ultimately, neuroscience hasn't been able to find language happening in a brain yet. Yeah, obviously it does happen in a brain, but this language organ that Chomsky talks about is really something which is hypothetical based on his inferences, which, are, as I say, they're controversial. Steven Pinker, who popularizes a lot of these ideas, wrote a celebrated book called The Language Instinct, where he more or less agrees with Chomsky's fundamental premises. There's a connection between Chomsky and behaviorism, and that is that in 1959, Chomsky writes a review of Skinner's last major book. I mean, Skinner keeps publishing for the whole of his life, but produces a big book which he'd been working on for 20 years. And it wasn't called Language, and it wasn't called speech, and it wasn't called writing. It was called Verbal Behavior. So what Skinner wanted to do is say that speaking and writing are forms of behavior. They're not things in themselves. Now, of course, Chomsky took umbrage at this, and he wrote a famous review in 1959 of Skinner's book, which effectively demolishes behaviorism. I mean, behaviorism was about to be demolished, perhaps, because of this idea of control. This was, the 1950s, the 1960s. It was the Cold War, the idea that there was a big brother who could manipulate environments and position you in these kinds of ways was becoming abhorrent to people. So maybe the zeitgeist was changing, maybe Skinner was about to become unfashionable. But anyhow, this one article that Chomsky writes in 1959 kind of demolishes behaviorism for once and for all. Now, what's interesting is that we kind of find played out in this debate between Chomsky and Skinner some very old philosophical debates. So back in the 18th century, Descartes, the René Descartes, the philosopher, had coined this very famous phrase, cogito ergo sum, which in Latin, in the translation from the Latin, means I think, therefore I am. So in other words, the world that we understand, the world that we know, is a product of our thinking, right? In other words, we conceptualize the world. We have a word for a dog, and we see dogs which are very, very different, and we classify them all as dogs. So in a way, dogs don't exist in the world per se. It's our classification and our naming of them which makes the world the way it is. I think, therefore I am. I'm the centre of this perceiving universe. My thinking is the centre of a perceiving universe. We have, on the other hand, John Locke. And John Locke says that everybody in the world is a tabula rasa. Tabula rasa, another Latin phrase, is a blank slate. So what happens is we are nothing except we experience dogs in the world, and everything that we are and everything we know, we learn from experience. Now, what's interesting is Chomsky ends up explicitly saying, I'm in the same camp as Descartes, that my thinking creates the world. But in a way, Skinner is really the Lockean camp, which is that our environments frame our thinking. So this is actually, we're trying to sort of here frame this debate as symptomatic of larger issues about the nature of learning and the sources of knowledge. What we've done is we've grouped together a number of things under this phrase that we've coined brain developmentalism, from Piaget through to Chomsky, where what we're doing is we're coming back to the idea that minds are very much shaped in the structure of what brains are. Today, I mean, more modern versions of this are in the world of neuroscience, where we're trying to work out what the brain is and how it works in order to understand how learning happens. But one of the interesting things about this, or one of the aspects of this tendency, is that it's a focus on an individual. By definition of brain is, between my ears. That's where it is. It's an individual kind of thing. And also, these kinds of approaches perennially have all sorts of problems with linguistic and cultural diversity. They can't deal with a lot of diversity. They can't say that people have made the world and learned the world and experienced the world in dramatically different ways, because they're trying to reduce all of humanity to these biological structures which surely we must all share.
I'm going to add another point to what Bill just said, and that is, of course, the working of the body and brain remains a very complex area for research, and certainly stages of growth happen and they're observable. However, any biological determinism or essentialism has serious problems for educators whose role it is to take individuals and transform them, to take learners and from in math or history or whatever subject and take them on a path where they are transformed as a consequence of that learning. So, of course, the debate that rages still about nature and nurture remains pertinent to these debates, the broader debates within educational psychology. And of course, environment matters for the behaviourist as well as the brain developmentalist. And it matters for cognitive, social and moral development. And we'll see how the environment now unfolds in our third part.